going down memory lane here. That picture comes from the fall of 1989. I had only been um, a senior at college, Miami University here, where I graduated with a math and teaching degree. But I had come home from our student teaching seminar before we were to go into the classrooms in the fall, and can remember mom sitting down having a talk with me in regards to my salvation. And before that night was over, my dad, which is behind me in that picture, along with Pastor Merle Williams, took me out to a creek to be baptized. And I went down in the wonderful name of the Lord that fall of 1989. Well, this episode's a little different. It's a testimony. In particular, thanks to this memory, it's a testimony in regards to, I'll just call it a translation testimony. But let me start back to how we were raised. Myself, my two older brothers, my younger sister, we were raised in church. We were raised to go to church. There would be weeks, especially when we were working with both the church in West Middletown as well as in Hamilton, in which we could easily be at service Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. And of course, if there were any revivals going on that were ministers that Dad wanted to go see or hear, we went, whether that be down to Kentucky or local. But definitely 2 to 3 nights a week, we were in church. We were raised to read the Bible. And of course, with the roots that we have, it was always the good old King James Version. And that's what this episode kind of will focus on, about the translation. But we were raised that way. I can remember going, especially in West Middletown, to Sunday school, and oftentimes I would sit with the adults because they were in the Bible. Arnold Brewer and the church there were very focused on going verse by verse through the Bible with Q&A, and you don't often find that. Definitely don't find it in churches today. And I enjoyed it. Wasn't a Christian. Granted, Dad and Mom had bought me a Bible when I was young. In 7th grade at that West Middletown church, when I went up to pray, Dad bought me my first reference Bible, a Schofield King James Version. And that version will be brought up, the Schofield specifically will be brought up at a later time in another podcast when I touch on some things. But we were raised, like I said, going to church, reading the Bible, and there would be folks that would mistake myself, my brothers, my sister as Christians because we knew the Bible. But once again, that goes back to our roots. We were raised to go to church, to pay attention to the preacher, and to study the Word, to study the Bible. I can remember my sister and I, and she can attest to this, being involved with a youth group, and they wanted her and I to kind of take over the leadership of the youth group, and we had to tell them, brother and sister so-and-so, we're not Christians. We were just raised to know the Bible. And of course, that's where this kind of is going. We were raised in the scriptures, raised to go to church, hearing the word, knew Bible verses by heart. One of my first vague memories of Sunday school down in Hamilton was Mom teaching a Sunday school class to the youth and memorizing a verse. My older brother memorized a verse and won an award for it. But that's how we were raised, and I didn't, I would have fully understood completely that, when it comes to the Bible, and this is a Thompson chain that I have, King James Version, that this is the way the Bible came. And I can remember in high school, those of you that, of course, maybe family or friends that went to the same high school I did, you may have knew about this course. You definitely knew the teacher, Mrs. Nicely. There was an English class that focused on, of course, this was the 80s. So Reagan and with what he did with faith in the schools, we had a class that referred to, I think it was referred to as Bible as literature. So we were studying the Bible and looking at it as literature. And I knew, oh, this is going to be an easy course. And relatively it was, but there were things that I encountered in that class that I had never necessarily heard of before. And a lot of it had to do with the history of the translations of the Bible. Matter of fact, in the back of the Thompson chain is a very similar picture. I remember being shown, hopefully it comes through, kind of hard to see, there it is, in which it shows the foundation going all the way back to the original manuscript and going through to eventually you get the modern English translations. I had really never seen anything like that and understood that, in ancient times, the Bible didn't come like this. It came as a scroll and individual books and individual letters and so on. And that was my first introduction on understanding a little bit about the history of where our Bible come from. And as a minister myself, I am concerned that as a people, as Christians, as a church, we don't have a solid grasp of that origin. Where did the scriptures come from? And we will take multiple episodes, and I say we, it's me and the Lord's guiding. We'll do multiple episodes in which we're going to focus a little bit on that. But for now, it's just about, it's just my testimony, where I was led. Of course, not too long after this occurred, when I was baptized and we were actively in church, and I think maybe in part due to my that Bible as literature class, something formed in me that I wanted to know more. And I can remember visiting a Bible bookstore, not too many of them in existence anymore. You got to go online. And it was in Middletown, and it's me, Dad, Mom, I do believe Annette, my sister, and we went in and I bought a Bible. A relatively new translation at the time. Of course, I was baptized in 1989. This would have then been more than likely in 1990, may have been in 1989. And I bought a New King James Version. Dad was definitely adamant against it. And I mean, the way we were raised, we fully were trained on a King James and King James only look. And it is a beautiful Bible. It is the way it's written. You definitely can memorize scripture very easily. But as I began to go down that pathway to try to understand more, thanks to Mrs. Nicely and what I was first introduced to in high school with that Bible as literature, I began to look even further in to an extent, not exceptional, but I eventually took the path similar to Dad, and this says nothing against Dad whatsoever, but I took a hard stance on King James only. No other version is accurate. I remember Dad had, if I remember right, they were records, but at the same time, I remember them on tape as well. But there was a minister, I think he was Baptist, had a bookstore outside of Dayton, Ohio, Terry McLean. and focusing on why the King James Bible was the only accurate version of the scriptures. Um, I can remember seeing those, hearing them. Matter of fact, I've got a tape of Dad singing where he recorded, and he was apparently needing extra tape, and he recorded over another recording, and at the beginning of that recording, you hear Terry McLean beginning to teach, and then, of course, it kicks into where Dad recorded. Um, but as I was going through after becoming a Christian myself, being baptized, and eventually in the spring of 1993, being called to minister, I definitely went to a hard line, King James only. I can remember between after becoming a Christian to even well after being a minister, when I would pick up, because of that curiosity about these other versions and seeing the chart and understanding from, because I love history, but understanding from a historical point of view, there were other Bibles before the King James. I would pick up other Bible versions when I was in um, the Bible bookstore and would look at them and would read some, but then I would do, and I think any of us that were raised on King James, we automatically will check certain scriptures. For me, it was always 1 John 5:7 and the end of Mark 16. Um, if they weren't there, I automatically set the Bible aside saying they got it wrong. And I would say many of you that have been raised in a King James environment feel the same way. Matter of fact, I can even, and currently it's packed away since we have downsized. Otherwise, I would show you the book here. I even had purchased Gail Riplinger's book on, I think it's referred to as New Age Bible versions, and you see a dragon on the cover of this book, and of course it attributes any of the modern English translations. It attributes it to Satan, and so I had been going down that avenue. But as I would read through that book, things bothered me. Bothered me in the sense the individual, in this case, Gail Riplinger, was presenting things to be facts, but as I would read them, I would always question, for one, the nature in which they were presenting it, always downgrading, never in a positive light in regards to speaking about any of the translators. I, to put it in a very common sense way, it was almost like a bully on the playground. Um, and I can't stand bullies, but it was like a bully, not loaded with facts necessarily, but just bullying others, and that kind of troubled me. They had I mean, it's a thick book, lots of resources in there, but oftentimes, and as I began to continue my as a minister look at it, I was beginning to see things differently in regards to the argument they were presenting. And it continued to trouble me. Granted, I maintain reading, as I said, the King James version. It's once again beautiful um, version of the Bible, and as I said, easily one that the way it's written, easy to memorize. And in fact, thanks to being raised on King James Bible, going down back to the high school setting, when we had to read, whether it be Romeo and Juliet or anything else Shakespeare, it made sense. Well, why did it make sense? Well, it's the same era. The English that was used for Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and all those other writings by Shakespeare in that time period was the language of the King James Bible. And so it made it very easy to understand that. So that I was very thankful with that. When other students were complaining and griping about not understanding what Shakespeare was trying to say, it made sense. But once again, that was due to the King James Bible. Um, but as time went on, and we're talking significant amount of time. I'm not a young man anymore, um, into my 50s, past the midway mark. Matter of fact, I've now lived longer than my dad did. But as I would continue to look at the different versions and become acquainted with what's out there, I began to realize there were times I wanted to read more. And matter of fact, and I can remember being at a church when this occurred. Now, some of you may say that's not the Lord's doing, but I received that unction when I feel the Spirit moving in me to do something. It was that, and it was to purchase another Bible version to read. And like I said, some of and I was in church, so some of you may be thinking once again, Nate, you're just you're just misreading what that was. No, I didn't. It was truly about um, I've it was a strong unction. I fought it for a good while, but it was a strong unction to buy another version. Um, and at this time, of course, I was at the point of regularly reading the Bible through in a year, which I mentioned in my other episode, the differences between study, memorization, and just reading. And it was that same kind of unction I received that even though we studied and read the Bible, I didn't read through the Bible in a year. And I can remember, a matter of fact, I was working on my doctorate degree and I was down on campus. And that unction from the Lord was to read through the Bible in a year. I mean, I was there during the uh, uh, Christmas break season. We were having classes, and I remember being in the hotel, and that unction and came strongly. So from that time on, I purposely would read through the Bible uh, each year, and that has been going now on for close to 15 years where I would do that. But that's that same kind of unction where I was to read a different, I was to purchase a different version. So the one that was I was prompted to do was the NASB, which is turns out a very literal word for word type of translation, even more so than the King James. And that was my first experience with reading um, on a consistent basis another version. And definitely, when you've been raised on one Bible version, it's unsettling for one to because you'll question yourself. Well, what does it say over in this version? What does it mean in the King James? Or how did they word it there? You'll question. But that is actually excellent resource for study because it will force you to see what are these translators saying. And I, from then on, would purposely pick, um, either on my own or if led by the Spirit, that unction, a different type of version every year as I would go through. So one year NASB, one year NLT, um, and I could go on with different ones. Currently, well, last year, because I had never read the New King James completely through, last year I read through the chronological version of the New King James Version. And this year, I've decided to go with the NIV, two classics in terms of versions that have been around for some that people are well aware of. I had not completely read through. So, like I said, last year was New King James Version. This year is I'm going through the NIV. There's some things about the NIV that I don't like, but for reading, it's easy reading. And as is the case, I would grab my phone, but I'm recording with my phone. If I have a question, I pick up my phone, go to my Bible app, and I'll look at the King James. I'll look at the ESV. I'll look at these other versions to say it sounds different. But once again, that's the foundation of good study. And and I want to encourage you. And I'm sure some of you are going to say, no, Nate. I'll stick to the old-fashioned version, and I understand that. Matter of fact, in a church setting, everybody needs to be speaking out of the same Bible for complete understanding. So if your preacher's in the pulpit with King James, make sure you're reading King James. For individual Bible study, use what work. For reading, and as I shared in the other broadcast, read what you will definitely read. Um, and make sure you're studying and reading, because that is essential to growing in the faith. But over the last roughly 2 years, um, I've been diving deeper, and I fully believe it was the Lord leading me in this direction because of what I was finding. And at first, it unsettled me, but to looking at what's out there. Matter of fact, two good resources, and I won't dive into them here as much, but two books that I had purchased. One, and it's the first one, very simple read. Hopefully, it picks it up here. Is by Dr. Mark Ward, Authorize the Use and Misuse of the King James Bible. It's a simple read, powerful read, and it's a Baptist minister. He's also, of course, a college professor, but and does quite a bit of online teaching. But a simple book that some things I had never really considered when it come to the King James version. For one, he has, words that you don't necessarily understand. And granted, as I've heard many say, you could pick up a dictionary if you don't get the word and read it. I agree. Did that quite often. But and those are typically, and as what Dr. Ward would refer to as dead words, words that are no longer used. But the one that I found most powerful was, of course, false friends. He terms it as false friends. Words that we think we know, but they don't mean what we think they mean. And a lot of that has to do with language, like any other type of thing evolves over time. And as I mentioned, even when I held up the 1611 version, the way the writing was done and the words that are there, they have changed since 1611. That's one reason. If you even look into the history of the King James Bible, you will see multiple translations. But in this roughly 2-year time period, in looking at what Mark Ward had with that, came across a little bit more detail of, it's referred to as, if I get it right here, the scriptural criticism. I'm probably getting that piece wrong, but textual criticism. Sorry, it's textual criticism. And what they're doing is looking at the original manuscripts. When I held up that chart earlier, if it'll come into focus, you will see that down at the bottom where it talks about the original manuscripts down here, the New Testament, the original manuscripts were Greek, and the Old Testament's Hebrew or even Aramaic. And of course, in my one podcast, talking about those silent years, which was, I think, 2 episodes ago, the silent years, the Septuagint was the Old Testament being translated into the Greek. And in fact, Jesus and the apostles and disciples would quote from that translation, not even quoting from the Hebrew. And so as I began to look at understanding the textual criticism and the foundation of where we get our Bible today, the King James and several of the versions use a set of manuscripts, and it's a very, I don't want to call it small because it's a very rich resource. But the other Bible versions use those as well as additional. Matter of fact, some of the manuscripts they will use go back to as early as roughly 100 years after the apostles. Once again, I don't want to take a deep dive on the different manuscripts and all that. We will at a later point. But that led me to another resource, a little bit thicker, much deeper in terms of that, but it's by James White, the King James Only Controversy. Can you trust modern translations? Between these two textbooks, and of course the online resources, you could easily find in YouTube, um, James White and Mark Ward can get on your nerves occasionally, but they're still wonderful individuals in their teaching. Um, each of us have our styles. I'm sure I get on the nerves of individuals, but it opened my eyes even more to understand where our scriptures come from, and that in fact we can trust other scripture, other versions. Um, and for me, that's been exceptionally eye-opening and given me an understanding and depth of understanding with the scripture that I didn't have before. As I said, I could grab my phone or open up my Bible app on my computer, my iPad, and have access to hundreds of versions. And as I mentioned in my previous podcast, we have over 450 versions of the Bible. And probably the most dangerous thing right now is for individuals, and I am guilty of this, um, of telling individuals that if they're not reading the King James Version Bible, they are lost or they're in danger of being lost, um, because you're dealing with typically a young saint. And where I did this, I can remember doing a Bible study down in Hamilton. Matter of fact, I have the Bible. It was an NIV Thompson chain, in which I um, was so adamant on King James. I had his name's Gus. Try to track him down since coming to this understanding, and I've not been able to as of yet. But I had him give me his NIV, and I supplied him with the King James version because I knew reading the NIV would lead him down a lost path. And I've asked the Lord for forgiveness for that because he was reading and understanding through a version that helped him at the time. And as I said, I've been trying to track him down to return his Bible, but I've not been able to as of yet. But as I said, I started out this episode. It's truly nothing more than a testimony, and I want to encourage you, if you've not taken a chance to read another Bible version, do so. It will be unsettling. And you have to realize our Bible, even our King James Bible, was multiple translators coming together and giving their understanding and trying to be as faithful to the Greek and Hebrew as possible. But they knew. And of course, if you don't have the prologue to the preface, not prologue, the preface to the King James Bible, which typically is no longer in a King James Bible, you will read where they knew their translation wasn't perfect and that it needed to be updated as we go along. But the key comes back to what I even said in the last podcast is these versions that are out there. It's about making sure the common man can read, have access, understand God's word. And if that's an NIV, so be it. If that's the NASB, so be it. What you will have access to by going through the multiple versions is being able to see what one group of translators thought words meant versus the other. There's no conspiracy about trying to work in Satan. It's about trying to their best to understand what the word says. Matter of fact, my go-to version right now for study, and when I'm in my weekly Bible study with the ministers that we have on Thursday. Up on my screen, there will be the King James on the left, there will be commentary in the middle, and the ESV on the right. I go to the ESV. Why? Well, in studying within the last year, they're understood. Well, matter of fact, the last 2 years, where the ESV come from, how fundamental they were to sticking to what the original Greek and Hebrew happened to be. It was um, foundational for me in terms of understanding. And when you look on the broad scale, like I said, I'm going to take a deep dive in all the different styles, but when you look on the broad scale of translations, it is the ESV more fundamentally aligned with the Hebrew and Greek than even the King James. I'll reserve that for a later podcast when we take a deeper dive in the different translations. But I just wanted this to be a testimony, thinking back to, even when, of course, it's not going to come into focus here, about being baptized in that creek. Brother Dave had made an area there for the church to be able to go to, the creek next to his house there out of 7 Mile, and hear me being baptized. Remember coming up out of the water, a new man coming up, hugging my older brother Bill, just the love I felt in thinking about the growth and understanding. And as we, of course, as the focus of this podcast is about the word, but part of what I will be focusing on is Bible prophecy in the last days. And it's going to be essential that we know the word. And that's why, my first episode's focused on reading, just reading, memorizing, and study, looking at the differences. Once again, find yourself a Bible version that you will read every day. Make a point of it. Get up in the morning, read, and just, whether it's I'm going to get through the New Testament this year, or I'm going to go through the whole Bible this year, do it. But at the same time, especially speaking to you ministers, you better study. And that takes more than just a casual read. As I had said in that previous podcast as well, it is about work. If it doesn't feel like work, you're not studying. You're not studying right. And there is no quick answer to these things. It takes time. So I encourage you, if you're one that had been a little hesitant, but you've wanted to read a different version, do so. I mean, I keep wanting to grab my phone and it's hanging there, taking this video. Uh, there is way too much access today to any version you want. There are apps out there. It's just a matter of picking King James, picking New King James, picking whatever it happens to be. Not everybody was raised up on King James Bible, and it will be a struggle for those that are have not been raised up in the church. Excuse me. So if it takes them reading the NIV, the ESV, even like NLT, which is more of a paraphrase than a translation, so be it. The one thing that comes to me is the apostles came to the Lord angry because they saw others preaching in his name and casting out devils in his name. What did Jesus tell them? Did he say, go stop them? No. He basically said, if it's being done in my name, let them be. Nothing good can be said. I mean, anything that is said in his name was good and for the furtherance of the kingdom. So if an NIV, NLT, or some other version you're not comfortable with will get the lost into the church and get them saved, why are you stopping it? A little passionate about this. May give you an echo of episodes to come. I admit this to be a short testimony, but I'm bad for long-windedness, rabbit trails, and rabbit holes. But I want you to study. I want you to read. I want you to understand the scripture because with the things that we see before us, as we see the prophecies align, as I even mentioned in the last podcast about the current events, those four major ones taking place, there are other significant events that we're seeing unfold that will speak to the Lord's return. And unless you're grounded in the word, you're going to be confused. You may be unsure of what's occurring. And that's why, I had mentioned before, it's not, um, this podcast, it's going to be text over tradition. And for some of you, that will be uncomfortable whether it's going to the Greek or the Hebrew or looking at different Bible versions. But but growth comes out of being uncomfortable. Um, and I want you to grow in your faith, grow within the Word. To me, that is as a teacher, both in public setting as well as in the ministry, as being a professor, as a leader within my job. It's about getting you to where you need to be in the fullness of Christ. And that's a responsibility as a teacher, any minister. That is your responsibility to prepare the people. And it can only be done as if you have a firm foundation within the scriptures. So this isn't a fast food faith. We're going to take our time and walk through the Word. We're going to look at what is important within the Scriptures, what's tradition, and what is text. And getting a little passionate here, but I just wanted a little bit of reflect about my faith walk and let this be a little bit of translation testimony, if you will, and share with you to kind of give you a sense of what you're going to encounter on a weekly basis through this podcast. So I hope you got something out of this. I do, as always, like, share, but more than important than anything else, get into the Word, read it daily, study it continuously, and until we come together again, earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered unto the saints.